When the Royal Air Force unveiled the Lancaster bomber in 1942, German military commanders scoffed at reports of its capabilities. A four-engine bomber carrying 14,000 pounds of explosives? Impossible, they said. German engineering was superior, their aircraft more advanced, their crews better trained. 3 years later, as Dresden burned under an apocalyptic firestorm unleashed by Lancaster squadrons, those same commanders stared at reconnaissance photos in silent horror. The impossible had become their nightmarish reality. On a frigid February night in 1945, Flight Lieutenant James Harrison gazed out from the cockpit of his Lancaster as hundreds of identical bombers assembled in the darkness around him. Below, Germany's war machine lay vulnerable, soon to face a destructive force unimaginable just years earlier. Nicknamed city breakers by their crews, these massive bombers had transformed strategic warfare in ways that military theorists had never anticipated. The Lancaster's story began in the desperate early days of Britain's stand against Nazi Germany. With the fall of France in June 1940, Britain stood alone against Hitler's seemingly unstoppable war machine. The island nation faced a crushing reality. It could not match German ground forces, but it could strike back through the air. What was needed was a bomber capable of carrying unprecedented payloads deep into enemy territory. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In early 1941, Roy Chadwick, chief designer at Avro Aircraft, presented Air Ministry officials with designs for an aircraft that broke every conventional limit of the time. Most Allied bombers, including America's celebrated B-17 Flying Fortress, carried between 4,000 to 6,000 pounds of bombs. Chadwick's proposal promised more than double that initially 14,000 pounds, with potential for even more, as the design matured. Preposterous, declared one skeptical official. No aircraft can carry such weight and remain airworthy. Others questioned whether such massive payloads were even necessary. The Royal Air Force's existing medium bombers had been striking German targets for months with limited success. Would larger bombs truly make a difference? Air Marshal Arthur Harris, newly appointed head of RAF Bomber Command, silenced the doubters. The enemy is producing war materials in hardened factories our current bombers cannot destroy, he stated flatly. Either we build aircraft capable of carrying weapons that can destroy these targets, or we acknowledge defeat. Harris understood what others did not. Strategic bombing required concentration of force. The mathematics were brutal but clear. To destroy a target required a certain weight of explosives delivered with precision. Smaller bombers meant more aircraft, more crews, more losses. A bomber carrying 4 times the payload of existing aircraft changed the equation dramatically. In August 1941, as the first Lancaster prototype took flight at Woodford Aerodrome near Manchester, German intelligence dismissed reports of the new aircraft. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, declared confidently to Hitler, "The British are desperate. They speak of wonder weapons because they know they cannot match our air power. These rumors of superbombers are fantasy propaganda to boost civilian morale." Göring's dismissal reflected a fundamental German miscalculation. Nazi leadership had convinced themselves that British industry, under constant bombing, could not produce advanced aircraft in significant numbers. They believed their intelligence on British manufacturing capabilities was comprehensive and accurate. This fatal underestimation stemmed from the Nazi regime's ideological blindness. Since 1939, Joseph Goebbels' propaganda ministry had systematically portrayed Britain as a decadent empire in terminal decline, its industry antiquated, its people soft and unwilling to endure hardship. These were not merely lies told to the German public, they formed the core beliefs that shaped German strategic assessment of their enemies. On the 3rd of March 1942, Lancaster bomber serial number L7540 took off from RAF Waddington for its first operational mission against enemy territory. Its target, the Renault factory in Billancourt, Paris, producing trucks for the German military. The raid's after-action report landed on Hitler's desk 2 days later. German officers in occupied Paris reported unprecedented destruction. 8,000-pound bombs had penetrated reinforced concrete structures previously thought impervious to air attack. The factory, critical to German logistics, lay in ruins. Hitler demanded explanations. How had British aircraft delivered such devastating weapons? Goering assured him this was an isolated success, perhaps exaggerated by local commanders seeking to explain their failure to protect the facility. Throughout the spring of 1942, as Lancaster production accelerated in British factories, German intelligence continued to underestimate both the aircraft's capabilities and production rates. A Luftwaffe assessment from May 1942 concluded, British claims of a heavy four-engine bomber superior to our own aircraft represent psychological warfare rather than operational reality. Their industrial capacity cannot support mass production of such complex aircraft. The reality unfolding across the British countryside told a different story. In factories from Manchester to Birmingham, thousands of workers, many of them women who had never before worked in manufacturing, were assembling Lancaster components with remarkable speed and precision. Production innovations borrowed from American methods allowed for modular construction, with fuselages, wings, and engine assemblies built separately, then brought together in final assembly. By June 1942-15, Lancasters were rolling off production lines weekly. A number German intelligence analysts refused to believe when presented with the figures. British industry is not capable of such output, one report concluded definitively. This conclusion reflected not just miscalculation but ideological certainty. The Nazi belief in their own industrial and racial superiority made acknowledging British achievements impossible. On the night of the 30th of May 1942, the German city of Cologne experienced the consequences of this miscalculation firsthand. Operation Millennium, the first 1,000-bomber raid in history, included 73 Lancasters among the attacking force. The city's defences, designed to counter raids by a few dozen aircraft, were overwhelmed. Over 600 acres of urban area were destroyed in a single night. The psychological impact on German leadership was profound. Goering, who had promised Hitler that no enemy bombs would fall on German cities, found himself unable to explain the scale of destruction. German night fighter commanders reported confusion among their pilots. There were simply too many targets to engage effectively. Survivors described the Lancaster's distinctive sound, a deep, resonant drone from its 4 Merlin engines that became known as the Symphony of Death in German cities. Unlike other aircraft, when Lancasters appeared, they brought unprecedented destruction. Their massive bomb loads transformed strategic bombing from harassment to city-leveling force. By early 1943, Lancaster squadrons were regularly carrying specialized weapons previously thought impossible to deliver by air. The 12,000-pound tall boy, and later the 22,000-pound Grand Slam earthquake bombs, could penetrate 20 feet of reinforced concrete before detonating. No German bunker, submarine pen, or hardened facility could withstand them. The aircraft's versatility proved equally valuable in the Battle of the Atlantic, where Lancasters modified for maritime patrol could carry torpedoes and depth charges against German U-boats. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. On the night of the 17th of August 1943, the true capability of Lancaster squadrons became horrifyingly clear to Nazi leadership. The raid on the Peenemünde research facility, where Germany's V-weapons were being developed, demonstrated precision targeting that German commanders had believed beyond RAF capabilities. Lancasters dropped marker flares with accuracy that allowed following aircraft to concentrate their bombs on critical research buildings and scientists' housing. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, later wrote in his memoirs, "The Peenemünde raid set back our missile program by months at a critical juncture. The British had somehow identified our most secret facility and struck with remarkable precision. After this, we were forced to disperse research underground, drastically complicating our work. This dispersal of German industry, moving factories underground, splitting production across multiple smaller facilities, came as direct response to the Lancaster threat. It consumed enormous resources at a time when Germany could ill afford such inefficiency. Roads and railways had to be built to new locations. Workers had to be transported greater distances. Production lines had to be disassembled and rebuilt, all because conventional air defences could not stop Lancaster squadrons from delivering their massive payloads. By late 1943, Lancaster production reached its peak, with 7 separate factories producing the aircraft across Britain. Monthly deliveries to RAF squadrons exceeded 100 bombers, allowing for the expansion of Bomber Command despite heavy losses. German intelligence finally acknowledged the scale of Lancaster production, but by then, strategic opportunity had been lost. The Luftwaffe's window to effectively counter the British bombing campaign through targeting Lancaster factories had closed. In the air, German defences struggled against the Lancaster's operational profile. Flying at altitudes above 20,000 feet, often in formations spread across miles of airspace, the bombers presented difficult targets for night fighters. Their defensive armament 303 machine guns in 3 powered turrets provided overlapping fields of fire that kept attackers at bay. But it was the aircraft's remarkable durability that most impressed its crews. Lancasters returned to base with damage that would have destroyed lesser aircraft. Flight Sergeant Thomas Benson's Lancaster D-Dog landed at RAF Scampton in October 1943 with over 200 flak holes, 1 engine destroyed, and 3 feet of its port wing missing. "She flew like a wounded duck," Benson reported, "but she got us home. Any other aircraft would have fallen from the sky with that damage." Stories like Benson's circulated through Luftwaffe fighter squadrons, creating a mystique around the Lancaster that affected pilot morale. In Berlin, as 1944 began, Nazi leadership finally confronted the reality they had denied for so long. The Lancaster was not propaganda, but a devastating weapon being employed with increasing effectiveness against German industry and cities. Hitler demanded explanations from his commanders. How had Germany's air defences failed so completely? How had British industry, supposedly crippled by German bombing, produced such formidable aircraft in such numbers? Goering had no satisfactory answers. His assurances about British industrial weakness had proven catastrophically wrong. His prediction that RAF Bomber Command would be destroyed by Luftwaffe fighters had failed to materialize. Instead, Lancaster squadrons grew stronger month by month, their tactics more sophisticated, their bombing more accurate. On the 30th of March 1944, the industrial city of Nuremberg became the target of 795 bombers, including 572 Lancasters. Though German night fighters inflicted heavy losses that night, the raid demonstrated Bomber Command's willingness to attack any target in Germany, regardless of defences. No German city was safe, no factory secure from Lancaster attack. The psychological impact on German civilian morale proved as damaging as the physical destruction. Dr. Joseph Goebbels, whose propaganda ministry had spent years telling Germans that the RAF was defeated, found it increasingly difficult to explain the nightly presence of hundreds of Lancasters over the Reich. His diaries from this period reveal growing concern about civilian reactions to continuous bombing. "The people no longer believe our assurances about air defense," he wrote in April 1944. "They hear the enemy aircraft overhead nightly and see the destruction in the morning." As D-Day approached in June 1944, Lancaster squadrons shifted focus to support the coming invasion. Their target list expanded to include transportation networks, coastal defences, and German military concentrations in northern France. The aircraft's versatility proved crucial, able to deliver massive conventional bombing attacks one night, then precision strikes against hardened targets the next. Colonel Heinrich Weber, commanding German forces near Cayenne, reported to his superiors after a Lancaster attack on his position. "These are not mere bombers, they are flying artillery that can obliterate prepared defences in minutes. When they appear, our soldiers cannot fight, they can only seek cover and pray." His assessment reflected the new reality of combined arms warfare. Lancaster squadrons had become a decisive element in Allied ground operations, able to destroy fortifications that would have cost thousands of infantry lives to capture. By autumn 1944, as Allied armies pushed toward Germany's borders, Lancaster operations reached their peak effectiveness. New navigation aids, improved bomb sights, and refined tactics allowed for bombing accuracy, previously thought impossible for night operations. German night fighter forces, depleted by fuel shortages and pilot losses, could no longer effectively counter the raids. On the 13th of February 1945, the culmination of Lancaster capabilities was demonstrated against Dresden. In a coordinated attack involving 722 RAF bombers, primarily Lancasters, the city experienced what witnesses described as a firestorm, a self-sustaining conflagration that consumed everything within its radius. The massive bomb load of each Lancaster contributed to a concentration of force that overwhelmed all civil defences. German military leaders, who had once dismissed British bombing as ineffective, now witnessed destruction on a scale they had not believed possible. The Lancaster, carrying 4 times the payload of the American B-17, had transformed strategic bombing from harassment to city-destroying power. The aircraft they had once mocked as British propaganda had become the instrument of Germany's devastation. In underground command bunkers, as reconnaissance photos of Dresden's destruction arrived, German generals contemplated the scale of their miscalculation. For years, they had dismissed British industrial capacity, underestimated British engineering, and derided British determination. The Lancaster bomber stood as physical refutation of every assumption that had guided German strategic thinking. As Germany collapsed in the spring of 1945, with Lancaster squadrons still delivering nightly devastation across what remained of the Reich, Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the German Armed Forces High Command, offered a bitter assessment. "We believed our own propaganda about British weakness. We convinced ourselves they could not build weapons to match our own. The Lancaster proved every assumption wrong. Against such capability, defeat was inevitable." In April 1942, as Britain faced Nazi Germany alone, Air Marshal Arthur Harris convened an urgent meeting at RAF Bomber Command, headquarters. Before him stood the commanders of Britain's strategic bombing force, men whose squadrons had been striking at German targets with limited success for nearly 3 years. Harris gestured to photographs spread across the table. German factories still operating despite repeated bombing raids, submarine pens unscathed by thousands of bombs dropped. "Gentlemen," he declared with cold certainty, "what we lack is not courage but concentration. The enemy has dispersed our effort by forcing us to attack with inadequate weapons. That ends today." Harris unveiled engineering diagrams of a new weapon, the Lancaster bomber, with its unparalleled 14,000-pound payload capacity. While America's B-17 Flying Fortress carries a maximum of 4,800 pounds of bombs, he explained, our Lancaster delivers nearly 4 times that weight. This is not merely an improvement, it is a revolution in strategic bombing. The officers stared in silence, the implications slowly dawning. The mathematical advantage was undeniable. Each Lancaster could deliver the destructive power of 4 flying fortresses. Britain had found its answer to German industrial might. 3 years later, on the 13th of February 1945, that mathematical advantage materialized in fire and destruction over Dresden. What German air defense commanders witnessed that night was the culmination of Britain's strategic bombing evolution. Lancaster squadrons delivering unprecedented concentrations of explosive force, turning theory into apocalyptic reality. The city that had stood for centuries was transformed into an inferno within hours. German commanders, who had once dismissed British bombing as ineffective, now watched helplessly as Lancaster delivered firestorms consumed entire districts. The bomber they had once mocked as propaganda fantasy had become their inescapable nightmare. Flight Lieutenant William Harrington had joined 617 Squadron, the elite Dambusters, in January 1945. His previous experience flying American-made B-24 Liberators with Coastal Command had not prepared him for the Lancaster's remarkable capabilities. "The first time I took control," he later recalled, "I couldn't believe how responsive she was for her size. But it was the bomb bay that truly astonished me, a cavernous space that seemed to have no limits. When they loaded a 22,000-pound Grand Slam earthquake bomb, I wondered if we could even lift off. Yet she flew, steady as a rock, carrying what seemed impossible." Harrington's experience reflected a transformation in aerial warfare that had evolved since the Lancaster first entered service in 1942. The aircraft's development had begun in the desperate early days of the war when Britain faced German bombers striking its cities night after night. The nation's survival depended on developing the capacity to strike back effectively, to bring the war to German soil with sufficient force to impact the Nazi war machine. By February 1941, designer Roy Chadwick at AV Row Avro had completed plans for what would become the Lancaster. His starting point had been the troubled Manchester bomber, a twin-engined aircraft plagued by unreliable Vulture engines. Chadwick's breakthrough was elegantly simple. Replace the two problematic engines with four reliable Rolls-Royce Merlins and extend the wingspan to handle the additional power and weight. But Chadwick's most revolutionary contribution lay in the Lancaster's bomb bay design. Unlike the American B-17, with its narrow, segmented bay that limited payload size, the Lancaster featured a continuous, unobstructed space, running nearly two-thirds of the fuselage length. This cavernous capacity would allow the aircraft to carry weapons of unprecedented size bombs that could destroy targets previously considered impervious to air attack. When the Lancaster prototype first flew from Ringway Airport near Manchester on the 9th of January 1941, few outside the test team appreciated the aircraft's revolutionary potential. German intelligence, monitoring British aircraft development through agents and reconnaissance, initially dismissed reports of the Lancaster's capabilities as exaggeration or deliberate misinformation. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, received the first intelligence reports of the Lancaster in March 1941. He responded with characteristic dismissiveness. The British always claim miraculous new weapons when they are losing. This so-called super bomber is propaganda meant to raise civilian morale. Our analysis shows that no aircraft can carry the payloads they claim while maintaining operational range and altitude. This dismissal reflected a fundamental German miscalculation about British industrial and engineering capabilities. Since 1939, Nazi leadership had convinced themselves that British manufacturing was antiquated and inefficient compared to German methods. This belief wasn't merely propaganda for public consumption, it formed the core of their strategic planning and resource allocation. On the 10th of March 1942, the Lancaster went to war. 12 aircraft from 44 Squadron targeted the German port city of Essen, carrying a combined payload that exceeded what 30 B-17 seconds could deliver. Though results were limited by poor weather and primitive navigation aids, the raid marked the beginning of a new phase in the strategic bombing campaign. Within RAF Bomber Command, the Lancaster's advantages became immediately apparent. Squadron leader James Pickard of 83. Squadron submitted a report after his first operational flight. Aircraft performance exceeds all expectations, handling characteristics superior to any bomber I've flown. Most importantly, the bomb load capacity transforms our tactical options. We can now carry sufficient ordnance to ensure destruction of any target without requiring excessive aircraft numbers. Throughout spring and summer 1942, as Lancaster squadrons expanded and crews gained experience, German air defences struggled to adapt. Nazi Air Defence Commander General Josef Kammhuber reported to Hitler, "British bombing accuracy remains poor, but the weight of explosives now being delivered creates substantial damage despite imprecision. A single bomb strike from these aircraft can destroy structures our defences were designed to protect." This assessment reached Albert Speer, Reich Minister for Armaments and War Production, who recognized the implications before many military leaders. In June 1942, Speer ordered the dispersal of critical German industries away from major cities and the construction of hardened facilities that could withstand conventional bombing. These measures consumed enormous resources and reduced industrial efficiency, creating the first tangible strategic impact of Lancaster operations. The Lancaster's game-changing potential became fully apparent on the 16th of May 1943, when 19 specially modified bombers from 617 Squadron attacked 3 German dams in the Ruhr Valley. The aircraft had been adapted to carry Barnes-Wallis's revolutionary bouncing bomb, a weapon specifically designed to breach the massive concrete structures. The successful attack demonstrated the Lancaster's versatility and precision capabilities beyond simple area bombing. German leadership, which had previously dismissed British bombing as a nuisance rather than a strategic threat, now confronted a harsh reality. Field Marshal Erhard Milch, deputy head of the Luftwaffe, wrote in a memorandum to Goering, "The attack on the Ruhr dams demonstrates a level of technical sophistication and operational capability we had not credited to RAF Bomber Command. More concerning is their ability to modify these Lancaster aircraft for specialized missions against targets we considered secure." By late 1943, Lancaster production had reached peak efficiency. 7 separate factories across Britain were producing the bombers at a rate that German intelligence analysts initially refused to believe. When presented, with the figures more than 100 aircraft per month, Luftwaffe intelligence officer Major Anton Reichel commented, "These production numbers are fantasy. British industry, under constant bombing, cannot possibly achieve such output." Yet, the reality on German soil told a different story. Night after night, Lancaster streams numbering hundreds of aircraft appeared over German cities. Their distinctive sound, the deep synchronized drone of 4 Merlin engines, became a terrifying harbinger of destruction for German civilians. Children in cities like Hamburg and Cologne were taught to identify the sound in air raid drills, as the psychological impact of Lancaster raids began to affect civilian morale. The Lancaster's most decisive strategic advantage lay in its ability to carry specialized weapons that could destroy targets previously impervious to air attack. In June 1944, 617 Squadron began operations with the 12,000-pound Tallboy bomb designed by Barnes-Wallis. With its hardened casing and delayed action fuse, the Tallboy could penetrate deep underground before detonating, creating earthquake-like effects that could destroy hardened structures from below. German submarine pens, protected by reinforced concrete roofs up to 23 feet thick, had previously withstood thousands of conventional bombs dropped by Allied bombers. The Tallboy changed this equation. On the 24th of June 1944, Lancasters struck the U-boat pens at Bordeaux with the new weapon. Post-raid reconnaissance revealed massive internal damage to facilities previously considered bomb-proof. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the German Navy, reported directly to Hitler, "Facilities we designed to withstand any possible air attack have been severely damaged. If the enemy can consistently deliver such weapons, no surface installation, regardless of construction, can be considered secure." This assessment proved prophetic within months. Germany would be forced to abandon surface submarine construction entirely, moving assembly underground at enormous cost and with greatly reduced efficiency. As 1944 progressed, the Lancaster's impact extended beyond direct physical destruction. The aircraft's massive payload capacity enabled the RAF to employ area bombing tactics that forced German authorities to divert increasing resources to civil defense, firefighting, and reconstruction. More than 1.5 million personnel soldiers who could otherwise have served at the front were eventually assigned to air defense duties across Germany, a testament to the strategic impact of Lancaster operations. The Lancaster's supremacy in payload delivery remained unchallenged throughout the war. While American bombers like the B-17 excelled in defensive armament and formation tactics, none could match the British bomber's fundamental advantage, its ability to deliver overwhelming explosive force against any target. When American crews witnessed Lancaster operations, many expressed astonishment at the bomb loads the aircraft routinely carried. Captain Robert Humphrey, a B-17 pilot with the U.S. 8th Air Force, observed a Lancaster loading operation while on exchange duty with the RAF in November 1944. His report to American commanders was blunt. "The standard bomb load these aircraft carry exceeds our maximum overload capacity. Their ability to deliver this weight to target, often at lower altitudes than we operate, represents a strategic capability we cannot match with current aircraft." By early 1945, as Allied ground forces pushed into Germany from west and east, Lancaster operations reached their devastating peak. The February raids on Dresden demonstrated the culmination of 3 years' operational refinement, the perfect coordination of marking, bombing, and incendiary tactics that created the firestorm effect German civil defenses could not counter. German night fighter commander Colonel Harho Hermann, tasked with defending German cities against Lancaster attacks, later acknowledged the fundamental imbalance. Their payload advantage created an impossible situation for defense. When a Lancaster formation arrived over target, the concentration of bombs overwhelmed any defensive measures. The mathematical reality was simple. A single Lancaster could deliver destruction requiring 4 American bombers. Our night fighter force, already stretched beyond capacity, could not engage sufficient numbers to prevent catastrophic damage. In the final months of the war, as German cities burned and industry collapsed, the Lancaster's capabilities expanded further. Barnes-Wallis's ultimate creation, the 22,000-pound Grand Slam bomb, entered service in March 1945. Only the Lancaster could carry this weapon, which possessed the explosive force to destroy structures through earthshock rather than direct hit. The Bielefeld Viaduct, a critical railway connection protected by anti-aircraft batteries that had repelled 17 previous bombing attempts, was severed with a single Grand Slam strike on March 14, when Germany surrendered in May 1945. Lancaster squadrons had dropped more than 608,000 tons of bombs, approximately 51% of all bombs delivered by RAF Bomber Command throughout the war. This statistic reflected not just the aircraft's payload capacity, but its reliability and versatility across 5 years of combat operations. In Berlin's bombed-out Air Ministry headquarters, Allied intelligence officers discovered a telling document, a comprehensive Luftwaffe assessment of Allied bomber capabilities completed in January 1945. The report concluded, "The Lancaster represents the most significant strategic bombing threat. Its combination of range, payload, and reliability has proven decisive in the air campaign against the Reich. Our failure to appreciate its full potential in early 1942 represents a critical intelligence error that has contributed substantially to our current situation." This acknowledgement came too late for Nazi Germany. The Lancaster had delivered destruction on a scale their pre-war planners had not believed possible. The aircraft that German intelligence had initially dismissed as propaganda had become the instrument that systematically dismantled German industrial capacity and civilian morale. For crews who flew the Lancaster, its capabilities inspired confidence that translated into operational effectiveness. Flight engineer Sergeant Thomas Bentley of 57 Squadron expressed this sentiment in his wartime diary. "There's something reassuring about the massive bombs we carry, knowing that each aircraft in our formation is delivering 4 times what the Americans can bring to target. It gives meaning to our risks. If we're going to fly through Flattened fighters, better to do it with weapons that can end this war rather than merely scratch the enemy's paintwork." As victory celebrations erupted across Britain in May 1945, Air Marshal Arthur Harris could reflect on the transformation the Lancaster had brought to strategic bombing. What had begun as desperate raids by inadequately armed bombers had evolved into a decisive strategic campaign enabled by an aircraft of revolutionary capabilities. The Lancaster had not merely participated in the Allied victory, it had fundamentally altered the equation of modern warfare through its unparalleled ability to deliver destructive force precisely where needed. The war's aftermath brought recognition of the Lancaster's significance from an unexpected source. In 1947, during interrogation at Nuremberg, former Armaments Minister Albert Speer was asked which Allied weapon had most impacted German war production. His answer was immediate: the Lancaster bomber. Its payload capacity forced industrial dispersal that reduced our production efficiency by at least 30%. When combined with specialized weapons no other aircraft could carry, it represented a threat we could neither adequately defend against nor adapt to. Had its full potential been realized a year earlier, our defeat would have come that much sooner. This assessment from Germany's production mastermind confirmed what Lancaster crews had demonstrated through years of dangerous operations. Payload capacity translated directly to strategic impact. By delivering 4 times the destructive force of a B-17 flying fortress, each Lancaster magnified the effectiveness of Bomber Command's limited resources, ultimately helping to bring about the defeat of Nazi Germany through the systematic destruction of its industrial capacity and military infrastructure. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.